She arrived every morning before anyone else. The office was still dark, the hallways quiet, and the only sound was the soft squeak of her shoes on the polished floor. With a bucket in one hand and a mop in the other, the cleaning lady moved from room to room, wiping desks, emptying trash bins, and making sure everything looked perfect before the employees arrived. She worked quickly, but carefully, never leaving a corner undone. This was her routine, and she took pride in it. She didn't have a fancy office, a shiny suit, or a high salary, but she believed that work deserved respect, but respect was the one thing she rarely received. By the time the employees walked in, she was usually finishing up in the last few rooms. Instead of greeting her or thanking her, most of them walked past as if she didn't exist. Some would roll their eyes when they saw her. Others would whisper rude comments just loud enough for her to hear. "Look at her," one young man laughed as he passed. "She's been here for years and still mopping floors. Imagine being stuck like that." Another woman smirked and added, "She probably doesn't even know how to do anything else. That's why she's stuck cleaning after us." They laughed together as if it were the funniest thing in the world. She heard every word. She always did. But she never replied. She just kept working, her eyes focused on the mop, her hands steady. The worst, however, was the boss. He wasn't a kind man, though he loved to pretend in front of clients. To his employees, he was strict and arrogant. To the cleaning lady, he was downright cruel. He thought making jokes at her expense was harmless fun. One morning, when she was polishing the glass doors, the boss walked by with a group of executives. He stopped, looked her up and down, and chuckled loudly. "Careful, everyone," he said. "Don't slip on the water roar. You might end up like her, spending your life cleaning floors." The group laughed, some nervously, others a little too loudly, trying to impress him. The cleaning lady froze for a moment, her cheeks burning, but she said nothing. She simply bent down and continued wiping until the glass shone to them. It was just a joke. To her, it was another cut on a wound that had never healed. The mockery didn't stop at words. Sometimes they left trash scattered across the floor on purpose, testing her patience. A few even spilled coffee or crumpled papers just to see her pick them up. One afternoon, a group of interns tossed candy wrappers all over the break room. When she entered, one of them pointed and said loudly, "Don't worry, that's her job. She lives for this." The others laughed, stuffing chips into their mouths while she bent down to collect the mess. She didn't argue, didn't scold, didn't even look at them. She simply worked in silence, though inside her heart ached, but what no one knew was that she was always watching. Behind her quiet eyes and calm smile, she noticed everything: the way the boss cut corners in contracts, the way employees gossiped about clients, the small lies told to cover big mistakes. She kept these observations to herself, never reacting, never speaking out. They thought she was invisible, but she saw more than they could imagine. The more they mocked her, the more confident they felt in their superiority. They believed she was powerless, stuck in her role forever, someone they could laugh at without consequence. But deep inside, she was building strength. Every insult, every cruel laugh, every careless word was fuel. She reminded herself that dignity wasn't about a job title. Dignity came from character. And while they mocked her, she was quietly preparing for the day when the tables would turn. They thought she was just a cleaning lady, but soon they would learn that she was much more than that. Every insult she heard became a stone on her heart, but she refused to let those stones weigh her down. Instead, she used them to build her inner walls of patience, of calmness, of silent strength. When the office mocked her, she did not reply. When the boss made cruel jokes, she did not cry. Her silence was not weakness. It was power. had learned long ago that shouting back only gave bullies more reason to laugh. So she chose dignity over anger. Day after day, she arrived earlier than everyone else and left later. She kept the offices spotless, not because anyone appreciated it, but because she believed in doing her best, no matter the job. While the employees saw only a woman in uniform with a mop and broom, she saw herself as someone who carried pride in her work. There were times, of course, when the pain almost broke her. She would stand alone in the supply closet after hearing a particularly cruel comment. Her hands would shake, her eyes would fill with tears. But after a deep breath, she wiped them away and returned to her duties. She knew she could not let their words decide her worth. Slowly, her quiet strength began to show in unexpected ways. One morning, a young employee spilled hot coffee on the floor and panicked because an important client was about to arrive. He barked at her rudely. "Hurry up! Clean this before the client sees it." Instead, she calmly walked over, took out her cloth, and cleaned the spill carefully, leaving no stain behind. Then she looked at him not with anger, not with resentment, but with steady eyes and said, "You don't need to shout. I will always do my job, whether you respect me or not." The employee froze. For the first time, he saw not just a cleaning lady, but a woman who carried herself with quiet dignity. Her patience also made her a silent observer. When employees mocked her, they never realized she was listening to their careless conversations. She overheard them complaining about deadlines, about projects, even about mistakes they tried to hide from the boss. She learned who was lazy, who was dishonest, and who secretly hated the company. She never repeated what she heard, but she remembered everything. She also noticed the boss more than anyone. She saw the way he cut corners, the way he treated people unfairly, the way he bragged about deals he didn't fully deserve. While he thought she was invisible, she quietly collected a picture of the man behind the mask. What kept her going was not the money. It wasn't even the job security. It was her inner promise to herself that no matter how the world treated her, she would never lose her self-respect. Some nights, when she returned home exhausted, her neighbors asked her, "Why? Do you still work there? Don't you get tired of their insults?" She would smile softly and reply, "A storm cannot break a mountain, and words cannot break me." Her neighbors admired her spirit, even if they didn't fully understand it. One day, her strength shone in a way no one could ignore. A client from another city visited the office. Unlike the employees, he greeted her politely as she cleaned the hallway. "Good morning," he said warmly. "You keep this place shining." She thanked him with her usual gentle smile. Later that day, the same client accidentally left behind important documents in the meeting room. Before anyone noticed, she found the folder. She could have ignored it or handed it to the nearest worker. But instead, she quietly walked into the meeting herself and placed the folder on the table. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice calm and respectful. "You left these behind." The client's eyes widened. "Thank you," he said gratefully. "You may have just saved me from embarrassment." Everyone in the room stared at her. For a brief moment, the woman they mocked looked taller than all of them. She didn't stay for praise, she simply bowed her head and returned to work. But whispers began. The employees realized she had more awareness, more responsibility, more reliability than many of them. The boss, however, still refused to change. He continued with his arrogant jokes, his public humiliation. Yet even he began to notice something strange. No matter how much he tried to bring her down, she never cracked. She never begged for mercy. She never lashed out. Her calmness irritated him. It made him feel small, though he couldn't understand why. Why does she never answer back? He muttered to himself. Does she think she's better than us? But deep down, he already knew the answer. She was better. Not in wealth, not in position, but in spirit. Her silent strength was like a seed buried in the ground. No one saw it growing, no one expected it to sprout. Yet with each day, it pushed deeper roots, preparing for the moment it would rise above the soil. The office thought she was powerless, but slowly, quietly, her presence began to command respect. Some employees stopped mocking her, not because they suddenly liked her, but because they realized their words had no effect. Others grew uncomfortable, sensing something they couldn't explain. It was only a matter of time before the truth would come out before her strength, hidden for so long, would explode in a way that none of them could deny. They thought she was only a cleaning lady, but she was much more. She was the calm before the storm, and the storm was coming. She had always kept her life outside the office private. No one knew where she lived, no one knew about her family, and no one asked. To the employees, she was just the cleaning lady, someone who existed only inside the building, broom in hand. But the truth was far deeper. At home, she was not invisible. Her small apartment was filled with books stacked on every shelf, books about law, management, and leadership. Every evening after her long shifts, she would sit by the window, put on her reading glasses, and study late into the night. While the world saw her wiping floors, she was quietly feeding her mind. Her father had once told her, "Knowledge is a weapon no one can take from you." She had never forgotten those words. Years ago, before she took this cleaning job, she had studied business at a university. She had dreams of building her own company, but life had taken cruel turns. Her mother fell ill, bills piled up, and she was forced to take any work she could find. The cleaning job was supposed to be temporary, but temporary stretched into years. Still, she never gave up on her dream. She kept reading, kept learning, kept preparing because deep inside, she knew one day the world would give her a chance to rise. At the office, no one suspected her hidden knowledge, but small things began to slip through. One afternoon, two employees were arguing over a contract. They were whispering in the break room, trying to make sense of the legal terms. She was nearby, cleaning the counter, when one of them sighed. "I don't understand this at all. We'll probably lose money on this deal." Without looking up, she spoke quietly. "That clause means the supplier has the right to increase prices after 6 months. If you don't renegotiate now, the company will face a big loss later." The employees turned to her, stunned. "How do you know that?" one asked. She just smiled and shrugged. "I read sometimes." Then she walked out, leaving them staring after her. Later that week, her prediction came true. The supplier confirmed. The clause and the company had to scramble to fix the contract. Those employees never mocked her again. The boss, however, still treated her the same. In his eyes, she was nothing more than a background worker. But behind his back, whispers were starting. "Did you know she spotted an error in the contract?" One employee murmured to another. "She's smarter than she looks," came the reply. These whispers didn't stop the mocking entirely, but they planted seeds of doubt. People began to wonder if the woman they had underestimated for so long was hiding more than they thought. Her hidden strength showed in other ways too. During lunch breaks, she often sat alone, quietly eating her simple meal. Sometimes, younger employees came to her not to mock her, but to talk. They shared their worries, their stress, their struggles with the boss. She listened patiently, nodding, offering calm advice. "You must never let someone's cruelty define you," she told one intern who had been scolded unfairly. "Remember, storms don't last forever." The intern left with tears in her eyes, but also with new courage. Word spread that the cleaning lady was more of a mentor than anyone else in the office. Slowly, a quiet respect began to grow. But the most shocking truth remained hidden. The cleaning lady had connections once that no one could imagine. Years ago, she had worked closely with a member of the company's board. He had seen her intelligence, her dedication, and her potential. When her mother became sick and she had to step away, he told her, "One day, I will repay you. One day, your time will come." She never told anyone about this. She didn't want pity or special treatment. She wanted her strength to speak. For itself, what no one knew was that the board member hadn't forgotten her. He still followed her life quietly, and when whispers about her mistreatment reached him, he began paying closer attention. One fateful evening, the boss stayed late. In the office, bragging on the phone about a deal he had secured. He didn't realize the cleaning lady was in the next room, listening as he spoke carelessly. Double quotes, "Yes, I cut corners," he said, laughing, "No one will notice. The board only cares about results, not how I get them. And even if they did find out, who would they believe? Me or a bunch of clueless employees?" Her hands froze on the mop handle. She realized then that the corruption ran deeper than she thought. And she also realized that she had the knowledge, the memory, and the strength to expose him if the time came. The hidden truth about her was no longer just her education or her connections. It was her ability to see clearly when others were blind. She had endured the mockery for years, but in her silence, she had gathered every detail, every mistake, every weakness of those who thought they were above her. She was not powerless. She was waiting, and as fate would have it, the opportunity to reveal who she really was coming soon. For now, she continued to clean, continued to endure the whispers, the laughter, the arrogance. On the surface, nothing had changed. But under that quiet surface, everything was building toward the moment when the world would finally see her true self. They thought she was just a cleaning lady, but soon it would discover she was the key to the company's future. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be her standing in shame, it would be the boss. The day began like any other. She arrived before sunrise, quietly moving through the empty halls, cleaning and preparing the building before the busy storm of employees poured in. Her hands worked with calm precision, her face steady, though. Inside, she carried the weight of years of silence. But something in the air felt different that morning. A strange tension filled the office as soon as the workers arrived. Everyone seemed restless, whispering about an important meeting scheduled for later in the afternoon. The company's board members were visiting to review the boss's performance. For him, this was the biggest day of the year. For her, it was supposed to be just another long day with a mop and broom. She didn't yet know. This would be the day everything changed. By midday, the atmosphere grew heavier. Employees rushed around, preparing files, polishing presentations, arranging chairs. The boss barked orders at everyone, demanding perfection. He wanted nothing out of place when the board members walked through the door, and then his eyes landed on her. She was quietly wiping down the glass doors at the entrance when he approached. His voice sharp. "You there?" he snapped. "Make sure every corner is spotless. Do you understand? Today is not the day for you to slack off." She nodded politely. "Of course, sir. Everything will be ready." Her tone was respectful, her words calm. But his arrogance only grew. He turned to his assistants and smirked. "If this office looks good, it won't be because of my timiddle. Be because our cleaning lady worked harder than all of you combined. Maybe I should put her in charge." Laughter erupted. Some employees chuckled nervously. Others laughed too loudly, eager to stay in his favor. She stood still, her rag in her hand, her cheeks warm, but she said nothing. She lowered her eyes and continued wiping. As the day went on, the mockery worsened. Stress made the boss crueler than usual, and he used her as his easiest target. At one point, during a final check in the main conference room, he deliberately called her in front of everyone. "Come here," he ordered loudly, while the employees watched. She walked in quietly, holding her cleaning supplies. He pointed at the long wooden table. "This table isn't shining enough. What do you even do all day? Do you call this cleaning?" The room grew silent. Everyone stared at her. She looked. At the table it was spotless, polished so well she could almost see her reflection. But she said nothing. He wasn't finished. "Look at her," he continued, gesturing toward her as though she were an object. "This is why people like her. Never move forward in life. They settle for scrubbing floors. They lack ambition. They don't even know what success looks like." The words cut deep. For years, she had endured jokes and whispers, but this was different. This was a public humiliation, an attempt to break her spirit completely. Her hands trembled slightly, but she held her head high. She refused to let her tears fall in front of them. The room filled with a heavy silence. Some employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even those who had mocked her in the past felt uneasy. But no one spoke. Up. The boss was powerful, and they were too afraid to challenge him. Finally, one of the interns whispered under her breath, "That's not fair." But her voice was drowned by the boss's booming laugh. "Not fair," he scoffed. "Life isn't fair, and people like her should be grateful they even have a job here." That was the breaking point. She straightened her back. Her trembling stopped. She looked directly at him for the first time in years, not with anger, not with fear, but with steady courage. Her voice was calm, but every word carried weight. "You may laugh at me, sir," she said slowly. "You may mock my job, my uniform, even my place in this company. But remember this, dignity doesn't come from titles or offices, it comes from how you treat others. And today, you have shown the board exactly who you are." Gasps filled the room. No one had ever spoken to him like that. The boss froze, his face turning red. He opened his mouth to shout back, but just then the doors to the conference room swung open. The board members had arrived, and they had heard everything. The tension snapped, like a rope pulled too tight. The employees sat frozen in their chairs, eyes darting between the cleaning lady and the boss. The boss's smug smile had vanished, replaced by panic. The cleaning lady quietly placed her rag back in her bucket and stepped aside. She didn't need to say more. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, a truth no one could erase. The board members exchanged looks, their expressions unreadable. One of them, a tall man with silver hair, nodded slightly at her before turning his gaze on the boss. It was a simple nod, but it meant everything. She lowered her eyes again, quietly leaving the room. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained calm. For years, she had been silent, enduring humiliation after humiliation. Today, she had finally spoken, and her words had struck harder than any insult the boss had ever thrown at her, back in the hallway. As she carried her supplies, employees whispered to each other in shock. Some of them stared at her differently. Now not as the invisible cleaning lady, but as someone braver than any of them had ever been. She did not smile. She did not celebrate. She simply returned to her work, knowing that something had shifted. The storm had finally broken, for the first time. The boss was the one trembling, and deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The truth about him would come out. And when it did, the same woman he mocked would be the one standing tall. The board meeting began in silence. The employees sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact with the boss, who was visibly shaken after the confrontation just moments before. He tried to force a smile, but his voice trembled slightly as he welcomed the board members. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "thank you for being here. I'm proud to present our progress and achievements this year." But the words sounded hollow. The confidence he usually carried was gone, and the board members noticed they had entered at the exact moment he had publicly humiliated the cleaning lady. Though he pretended nothing had happened, The image of him mocking her lingered in their minds. The cleaning lady herself had left the room, but her presence was still heavy in the air. As the presentation dragged on, the boss tried to highlight the company's successes. He clicked through slides, bragging about revenue growth and new deals. But then one of the board members interrupted him. "Before we continue," said the silver-haired man, his voice firm, "I want to address something we witnessed earlier." The boss froze. His smile faltered. "Of course, sir," he said. Carefully. "What do you mean?" The board member leaned forward. "The way you spoke to your employee, the cleaning lady. Is this how you treat the people who work under you?" A murmur spread across the room. Employees exchanged uneasy glances. The boss stammered, "It was just a joke. Nothing serious. These people know I like to keep the mood light." But no one laughed. The room stayed cold and quiet. At that moment, the door opened. The cleaning lady walked back in, quietly carrying her supplies. She had planned to avoid the meeting, to continue her work unnoticed, but fate had other plans. The silver-haired board member turned to her. "Ma'am," he said kindly, "please stay a moment." Everyone's eyes followed her as she stopped in her tracks. She looked around the room, uncertain, but nodded politely and stood near the corner. The boss's face turned red. A tea forced. A laugh. "With all due respect, sir, she is just the cleaning staff. We don't need to waste your time with enough," the board member interrupted sharply. "Sometimes the truth comes from those we least expect. And I believe she has something to teach us all." Gasps filled the room. The employees sat frozen, waiting. The cleaning lady stood still, holding her rag in one hand, her bucket in the other. She never wanted attention, but now every pair of eyes in the room was on her. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her voice was calm, steady. "I don't want to waste anyone's time," she said softly. "I only want to say that respect should not depend on a person's title or job. Every worker, no matter their role, deserves dignity. A company that forgets this will lose more than profits. It will lose its soul." The room fell silent. Her words were simple, but they struck harder than the boss's entire presentation. The board members exchanged thoughtful looks. One of the women with sharp eyes leaned forward. "What is your name?" she asked gently. The cleaning lady hesitated. "My name is Grace," she replied. The silver-haired man smiled faintly. "Grace, that's fitting." The boss shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "With respect, let's move on," he said quickly. "We don't need to involve, but..." Another board member interrupted. "No, I think we do, 'cause I recognize her." The room gasped again. The board member adjusted his glasses. "Years ago, Grace assisted us during a contract review. She was not an employee, then just a temporary worker helping with documents, but her insight caught an error in $1 million deal. If not for her, the company would have suffered a major loss." All eyes turned to her. Grace lowered her gaze modestly, but the truth was out. She was not just a cleaner. She was someone with sharp intelligence, someone who had quietly saved the company before. The boss's face drained of color. That can't be true," he sputtered. "She's just cheese, just the janitor." But the board member shook his head. "No, she is much more. We don't measure worth by uniforms." Employees whispered in shock. Memories resurfaced moments when Grace had quietly given good advice, when she had spoken truths they ignored. Suddenly, everything made sense. Then came the final blow. The silver-haired man looked directly at the boss. "Do you know why we are here today? It is not just for numbers. We have been reviewing reports of workplace culture. Whispers reached us that employees were being mistreated. And today, we saw it with our own eyes." The boss opened his mouth, but no words came out. And do you know who we asked to quietly observe and report? The board member continued. He turned his gaze toward Grace. Her. The room erupted in shock. Grace stood still, her expression calm, though her heart raced. She had never wanted revenge, but she had agreed to help because she believed no worker should suffer humiliation like she had. Yes, the board member said firmly. Grace has been our silent observer, and what she has shown us is alarming. The revelation hit the office like thunder. For years, they had mocked her, treated her as invisible. But all along, she had been stronger, wiser, and more powerful than anyone realized. Some employees lowered their heads in shame. Others looked at her with newfound respect. The boss, however, was pale and trembling. His arrogance was shattered. He realized now that the woman he mocked daily had the power to decide his future. And for the first time, he was afraid. Grace didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply stood with quiet dignity, letting the truth settle over the room. She had been invisible for too long, but now the world finally saw her. And this was only the beginning. The room was frozen in silence. The boss sat stiffly at the head of the table, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge. Sweat beaded on his forehead, though he tried to force a confident smile. For years, he had commanded this office with arrogance, using fear and mockery to maintain control. But now, in front of the entire staff and the board, his power was slipping away. Grace stood quietly near the corner, still holding her cleaning rag. She had not asked for this moment, but it had come to her anyway. And she knew she could not step back now. The silver-haired board member cleared his throat. We have heard enough excuses. We witnessed how you treated your staff, and worse, how you humiliated this woman in front of everyone. That is unacceptable for a leader. The boss raised his hands quickly, his voice desperate. Please, you don't understand. It was only a joke. She doesn't mind. She's been here for years. Ask anyone. But no one spoke for him. Not a single employee dared to defend him. Some lowered their eyes. Others shook their heads slightly. For once, his cruelty had no support. Grace took a deep breath. She hadn't planned to speak again, but something inside her told her it was time. Slowly, she stepped forward, her voice calm but clear. Sir, she began, addressing the boss directly. You think dignity is something you can give or take away. You think people like me should stay silent while you laugh. But respect is not a gift, it is a choice. And you chose not to give it. Her words cut through the silence like a blade. The boss's face twisted with anger. You dare lecture me? You, someone who scrubs floors? You know nothing about leadership. Grace did not flinch. She looked him straight in the eye. Leadership is not about titles. It is about how you treat the people who cannot fight back. And in that, you have failed. Gasps echoed across the room. Even the board members leaned back in surprise at the strength in her words. The silver-haired man nodded slowly. She is right. He turned to the boss, his voice firm. We trusted you with this company, and you have proven yourself unworthy. You treat your employees as tools, not people. You humiliate instead of inspire. You cut corners instead of building trust. We cannot allow this to continue. The boss's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His face was pale now, his arrogance collapsing into fear. Another board member spoke. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your position as CEO. The words struck the room like thunder. Employees gasped, some covering their mouths. For years, they had endured his cruelty, never believing they would see the day he would fall. But now, before their very eyes, the man who ruled them with fear was powerless. The boss slammed his hand on the table. You can't do this. I built this company. Do you think you can replace me? With his words choked off when he noticed. The board member's eyes shift toward Grace. No. He whispered, "No, you can't be serious." Grace froze. She had never imagined this. She came here to survive, to do her job, not to take power. But the board members were serious. They had seen her strength, her intelligence, her dignity. And in her, they saw the leader he could never be. The silver-haired man spoke again. "Grace, you may not have asked for this, but you have shown wisdom, patience, and courage. You understand people better than anyone else in this room. You have our trust." The boss jumped to his feet. "This is insane. She's just a cleaning lady." Grace finally smiled, not out of pride, but out of peace. "Yes," she said softly. "I am a cleaning lady, and I have cleaned more than floors. I have cleaned away shame, and I have endured what others could not. That is more strength than you will ever have." The room erupted in quiet applause. Not loud, not wild, just steady claps of respect. For her, the boss looked around, searching desperately for someone, anyone, to defend him. But all he saw were the faces of employees who no longer feared him. They looked at him with contempt, while their eyes glowed with respect for Grace. "You can't do this," he whispered again, but his voice was empty now. Security was called. The once arrogant man who had humiliated Grace for years was escorted out of the building, his protests echoing down the hallway until they faded into silence. For the first time, the office felt light. The heavy shadow he had cast over everyone was gone. The employees looked at Grace differently now. No longer invisible, no longer mocked. She was the symbol of quiet power, of dignity that could not be broken. Grace, however, did not let the moment turn her heart arrogant. She stood humbly, her hands folded, her eyes calm. "I never wanted revenge," she said softly. "I only wanted respect. Not for me alone, but for everyone who works in silence." The board members nodded. "And you shall have it," the silver-haired man said. That day, the world turned upside down in the office. The boss who thought he was untouchable was dismissed. And the woman everyone mocked was finally seen for who she truly was: strong, wise, and unshakable. Grace walked through the halls that evening, not as the invisible worker, but as someone every employee greeted with respect. Some even approached her with tears in their eyes. "You taught us something today," one whispered. "You gave us courage," another said. Grace simply smiled. "Remember, dignity is not about power. It is about kindness. Carry that with you, and no one can take it away." And with that, she picked up her bucket and mop once more. Because for her, work was not shameful, it was honorable. But everyone knew now, she was not just the cleaning lady. She was the one who had dismissed the boss, and she would never be invisible again. The next morning, the office felt like a different place. For the first time in years, employees walked through the doors without fear of being mocked or humiliated. The air seemed lighter, as if the walls themselves had been freed from the weight of cruelty. And at the center of it all was Grace. She entered the building with her usual quiet steps, carrying her bucket and mop. But something had changed. People no longer avoided her eyes. They no longer looked through her as if she were invisible. Instead, they greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Grace," one employee said. "Thank you for yesterday," whispered another. Some even smiled at prom. Some even smiled at her with genuine respect. It felt strange at first, almost uncomfortable, but also deeply moving. For years, she had been treated as a shadow. Now, she was seen. Later that day, the board members called her into the conference room again. The room where she had once been humiliated now felt different. This time, she walked in with her head held high. The silver-haired man spoke gently. "Grace, we owe you much. Not only did you reveal the truth about our former CEO, but you also reminded us of something far more important: humanity. We cannot thank you enough." Grace bowed her head humbly. "I only spoke what was true," she said softly, but the board was not finished. "We want to offer you a choice," said the woman with sharp eyes. "You may continue in your current role if that is what brings you peace. But if you wish, we would also like to train you for a leadership position. You have the qualities we value: wisdom, patience, strength. This company needs people like you." The room grew quiet. Employees who had gathered outside to listen held their breath. Grace looked down at her hands. For years, they had scrubbed floors, polished tables, carried the weight of other people's carelessness. But those same hands had also carried her dignity, her strength, her quiet intelligence. She smiled faintly. "If I can help others be treated with respect, then I will do whatever is needed," she said. From that day forward, everything changed. Grace was no longer the cleaning lady. She became a mentor, a guide, a voice for those who had once been silent. The board arranged for her to take evening classes again, this time funded by the company. She studied management and leadership, while continuing her work. Slowly, she began to take on more responsibility. Employees who had once mocked her now came to her for advice. Interns especially gathered around her, eager to learn. She listened to their worries, encouraged their dreams, and reminded them never to let anyone steal their dignity. Her words became a quiet flame that lit up the whole office, and the boss who had humiliated her, he was gone, his reputation destroyed. Whispers about his downfall spread beyond the company. Other businesses heard the story too. Some mocked him for losing power to a woman he once called just a cleaner. But others admired Grace for her courage. She never celebrated his fall. Instead, she carried herself with humility. "It is not about who lost," she told her coworkers gently. "It is about what we gained respect." Months passed, and Grace's role continued to grow. She was soon promoted to staff coordinator, helping ensure that every worker, from the newest intern to the most senior employee, was treated with fairness. She organized small changes that made a big difference: better break schedules, fairer pay reviews, and a system where employees could safely share their concerns. The company's culture transformed. Where there had once been fear, now there was trust. Where there had once been mockery, now there was unity, and all of it traced back to the day Grace stood her ground with dignity. One afternoon, as she walked through the halls, she overheard two young employees whispering, "Can you believe she used to be the cleaner here?" One said, "Yes." The other replied, smiling, "And that's what makes her so amazing. She never gave up." Grace's lips curved into a small smile. She didn't need applause. She didn't need titles. All she ever wanted was respect for herself and for every person who worked with quiet strength. And now she had it. Her story spread far beyond the office. Newspapers picked it up. From cleaner to leader, the woman who changed everything. One headline read, "People who had faced similar struggles wrote letters to her, thanking her for giving them hope." She became a symbol not of revenge, but of resilience, not of anger, but of dignity. One evening, long after the office had closed, Grace stood alone in the conference room. She looked at the polished table, the same one where she had once been mocked in front of everyone. She ran her fingers lightly across the smooth wood. So much had changed since that day. She whispered softly to herself, "Dignity cannot be taken. It can only be given away. And I will never give mine away again." Her reflection in the shiny surface was no longer that of a silent, invisible worker. It was the reflection of a woman who had stood against cruelty, and won, not by force, but by courage. The new beginning was not just for her. It was for everyone who had once been silent, for everyone who had ever been mocked or underestimated. Her story became their story, and so Grace continued forward, not as the cleaning lady who had been dismissed, but as the woman who had dismissed. The boss. Her journey was far from over. It had only just begun.